He was not born, he was assembled. Before the title, before the soft steps, before the way everyone looked through him instead of at him, there was a purpose etched into something that could think. A sentient force, shaped to enforce a rule older than vows. Heaven must remain quiet, not peaceful quiet. No screaming, no panicking, no noise that bled into the machinery of angels and corroded the corridors of judgment. Whispers called it silence. Angels called it order. The living called it mercy. Popo called it a contract that could not be refused. For a long time, he kept it. He moved where the light thinned. He waited in thresholds that were never spoken of. When a spirit arrived already corrupted, when hatred had soaked into their aura like ink into cloth, Popo did not argue. He did not ask what they had endured. He erased it. He cleaned it away with the calm efficiency of a law that did not believe in suffering. And then the breach opened. It didn't arrive like a lightning strike or a dramatic prophecy. It arrived like an injury. A seam in the fabric of heaven, jagged and slow, as if reality itself had been pulled too hard for too long. Cold bled through. Not weather cold or cold. The kind that carries a hunger for bodies, a drumbeat that tells everything alive that it will be broken eventually. Popo felt it first, in the silence he guarded. The rule began to stutter. Somewhere beyond the seam, spirits were being dragged toward a mortal war that did not belong to their suffering. Heaven's boundaries, those delicate, proud lines between what was meant to happen and what should not, gave way. Not fully, not cleanly, just enough for the wrong noise to enter, just enough for Popo to be blamed for what couldn't be contained. He tried to shut the seam with the tools he had always used: pressure, erasure, the precise violence of cleaning without anger. The first touch failed. The breach did not recoil like an intruder. It swallowed his authority as if it had teeth. Then he took the damage first. That was the punishment. That was always the punishment. The contract demanded a price, and Popo paid it because his nature was to pay before anyone else felt the cost. The pain didn't bloom like a wound. It flared like an alarm. Something inside him seized control, not his mind, not his reason, not the careful routines of a guardian who could afford patience. His body moved like a verdict. He dodged strikes he could not yet see. He resisted forces that should have overwhelmed him before he could interpret them. He survived, then tried again, then survived again, until survival became a reflex, a mechanism with no time for thought. Each time it happened, he lost something small and irreplaceable: a memory shard, a sensation of warmth, the exact shape of his own identity as it had been before the breach. When the first tremor of ultra instinct arrived, it did not look like a power-up. It looked like missing time. A moment would end in one reality and begin in another, with Popo already standing where he had not walked. A strike would pass through emptiness where his body had been seconds before. Afterward, he would stare at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger who had borrowed narrowed his body to perform survival. But he kept his mouth shut, because silence was the only language heaven respected. The breach stabilized just enough for other things to be affected. Not heroes, not angels, echoes, failed guardians and fragments of beings that had tried to stop a superhuman incursion and died mid-motion. Their instincts, what they had done before they understood why, clung to Popo like ash that refused to blow away. He didn't learn from kindness. He learned from what survived. Training implies choice. Popo had no choice. He was forced to absorb the reflexes of those who had run out of time, and the only thing those echoes had offered him was reaction. No strategy, no doctrine, only the raw physics of avoiding death at the last possible fraction of a second. He began to recognize patterns too late, because recognition required thought, and thought was what he couldn't afford. That is how ultra instinct became his prison. Not because it was evil, because it was disobedient. Heaven's laws did not allow the pattern to breathe openly. Angels attempted suppression, the way doctors attempt containment, sterile, clinical, merciless in their calm. Threads of divine restraint sought his instinct like nets cast into darkness. Each time the restraint caught, it didn't stop him. It triggered him. It taught his body that the worst danger was not the attacker, but the governor of the attacker, the force trying to make him normal again. So he kept it hidden. He wore it as a rumor. He used it only when the breach demanded immediate silence, only when his survival reflex surged up from the floorboards of his being and refused to be polite. The more he used it, the more his cleaning blurred into slaughter. His vow was supposed to erase corruption, but corruption is stubborn. It spreads like smoke through cracks. When Popo's instinct began to awaken, it did not discriminate between infection and enemy. It treated everything that threatened the boundary as a thing that must be removed. Each erasure bought time for heaven's machinery, and each time it bought time, his soul thinned around the edges. He became a fugitive from divine discipline without ever leaving the grounds. Then 2 Super Saiyans found the breach. Their aura arrived like a verdict the universe couldn't appeal. They didn't come with reverence or hesitation. They came with momentum, violent intent turned into a lifestyle. Their presence made the seam shudder as if it was being pulled apart by hunger. The moment they crossed the threshold, Popo's body answered before his mind could. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't mercy. It was the survival reflex taking ownership of a fight it did not want, because the alternative was destruction of everything he was bound to protect. He raised his stance, and his legs moved too smoothly, like they were reading trajectories nobody else could see. The first Saiyan struck, confident, heavy, certain the hit would land. Popo wasn't there when the fist arrived. The impact splintered empty air and shattered stone that wasn't meant to break. The second Saiyan observed, adjusted, baited angles with calculated cruelty. He didn't overwhelm Popo with raw power alone. He hunted the rhythm of Popo's reactions. He tried to force thought into the gap between instinct and motion. So Popo fought the way a cornered animal fights. He didn't chase. He dissipated the enemy's momentum. He cut distances in half. He returned counters that looked like nothing at all, no grand explosion, no spectacle, just the unbearable sensation that the space between attacker and target had been rewritten. His face stayed almost still, almost calm, but the calm was not peace. It was concentration held together with dread. Each time ultra instinct flared, Popo paid. His memories stopped lining up. Sounds arrived late. He would hear his own voice after it left his mouth, delayed by a fraction of a second, as if his identity had to travel through a ruined corridor to reach his body. The Saiyans adapted. Of course they did. Two living storms do not stand in place for a miracle. They synchronized their pressure. One forced Popo backward, driving him toward the seam. The other circled, searching for the moment Popo would hesitate, searching for the human part that could be dragged into error. But Popo had already been punished into something less human. When the first instinct burst ended, he didn't feel relief. He felt vacancy, like the cost had drained the color from his perception. He realized then what the breach demanded. It wasn't victory. It was survival time long enough for heaven to reinforce its locks, time long enough for the next safeguard to arrive, time long enough to keep the noise from becoming permanent. So he stopped trying to win. He began trying to endure. He bought time with near-perfect dodges that weren't celebration, they were refusal. He broke their rhythm with short, surgical interruptions, cleaning the fight the way he had cleaned corrupted souls, removing momentum, removing access, removing the path forward. The counters didn't look righteous. They looked efficient, cold, and wrong, like a janitor cleaning a room while the building burned around him. And the wrongness accumulated. The Saiyans pressed harder, and Popo's body answered again, going beyond what he could comfortably hold. Something inside him cracked, not with pain, but with clarity. His instincts stopped asking permission from his past self. His clean became indistinguishable from slaughter again, and heaven's restraint threads tightened like nooses. Then the cost became visible. Frost-like light traced his form where it should not have been. His eyes darkened. His silence became louder than any scream. When he struck, the air didn't burst, it collapsed for a heartbeat, as if reality itself flinched away from his right to exist. He held them off anyway, not because he believed he could, because he had already learned the cruelest lesson of the contract. If a guardian breaks, the world follows it. The seam stabilized long enough for rescue to become possible. Not because Popo was praised, not because his sacrifice felt noble, because he finally served the only purpose that had never been questioned: containment. He pushed the breach back with the last intact piece of his will that could still understand what not letting it happen meant. When it ended, The Saiyans were still there, still dangerous, still alive, but shaken, as if they had been reminded that there are forces that do not fight like people. Popo wasn't exhausted in the ordinary way. He was emptied in a spiritual way, like a light bulb shattered inside a wall. He forced himself to lower his posture, to return to the role everyone pretended not to notice. A servant figure, a harmless silhouette, a joke for the impatient. It was the only way to keep Ultra Instinct from resurfacing openly. The contract remained. His vow remained. But after the breach, silence stopped being mercy. Silence became concealment. And Popo became the kind of guardian who could be underestimated because the most dangerous part of him had learned to hide inside survival. In heaven, they still called it duty. In the dark corridors where broken instincts linger, Popo knew the truth. He hadn't become a guide because he was kind. He had become a guide because once, when heaven needed silence most, he paid in pieces until all that was left of him was the instinct to stop disaster, no matter what it did to him while he was doing it.